I stood in the doorway of the reception hall and didn't move. The music was still playing. Someone was laughing near the bar. The whole room smelled like roast beef and old cologne and the kind of happiness that comes with an open bar at a Saturday wedding. And I just stood there holding 2 glasses of champagne, watching my wife lean into my best friend in a corner I wasn't supposed to see from where I was standing. She had her hand on his chest. His head was tilted down toward hers. It wasn't a hug. I know what a hug looks like. I've seen my wife hug 100 people over 41 years of marriage. This wasn't that. I set the glasses down on the nearest table. I don't remember whose table it was. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much for this story. I'm 63 years old. I retired 2 years ago from 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I have 2 grown kids, a daughter in Phoenix and a son in Raleigh. And I have a house in Central Virginia that my wife and I bought in 1998. We put in the back deck ourselves. Took us 3 weekends and 2 arguments about deck screws. I still think I was right about the deck screws. My wife, I'll call her my wife throughout this, because that's what she was for most of my adult life, and because the word still feels strange to say any other way. Her name was Nadine. Wait, I can't use that. I won't use that. I'll call her my wife. My best friend. I'll call him my friend, because that's the only word I have for what he used to be. His name was Arthur. We met in 1987 at a job site in Charlottesville. He was a contractor. I was the county inspector on the project. We argued the first week, had beers the second week, and were fishing buddies by the 3rd month. 36 years. He was at both my kids' births, waiting in the hallway with terrible coffee and worse jokes. I was at his mother's funeral. I helped him move 3 times. I lent him money once that he never paid back, and I never asked about. His wife, I'll call her June because she reminds me of something warm and steady, which is what she turned out to be. June and my wife had been friends for almost as long. The 4 of us had dinner together so often we stopped asking what time. We just showed up around 6. The wedding where all of this happened was for the son of an old colleague of mine. Good kid. Held it at a vineyard outside Culpeper. Beautiful September afternoon. The kind that makes you feel like Virginia apologizes for August by making September perfect. My wife had bought a new dress. Green. She looked good in it. I told her so in the car. We arrived, we ate, we danced a little. My wife and I hadn't danced in probably 4 years, but there's something about a wedding that makes you do things you stopped doing. She laughed when I stepped on her foot. It felt like a good night. Somewhere around 9 o'clock I went to get us drinks. The bar was at the far end of the hall, and on the way back I cut through a side corridor past the coat room. That's when I saw them. The corner was half behind a decorative partition, one of those white lattice things with fake flowers that photographers love. You wouldn't have seen it from the main floor. I only saw it because I was coming from the wrong direction. My wife's hand was flat against Arthur's chest. His hand was at her waist. Their foreheads were close together, and then they weren't, because they were kissing, and it wasn't a confused moment or a greeting or anything I could talk myself out of understanding. I stood there for what felt like a long time. It was probably 10 seconds. I walked back to the bar. I set the champagne glasses on the counter. The bartender asked if I wanted something else. I said I'd take a club soda. I stood at the bar and drank the club soda and watched the room. After a few minutes, my wife came back to our table from a different direction than the corridor. She smoothed her dress and picked up her purse and looked around the room the way people do when they're recalibrating. Then she saw me at the bar and smiled and walked over. "There you are," she said. "I was looking for you." I handed her the champagne. "Got turned around," I said. She didn't notice anything in my face. I don't know if that's because I hid it well or because she wasn't looking very hard. About 20 minutes later, I found June. She was sitting alone at a table near the windows, nursing the glass of white wine and watching the dance floor with the kind of expression that isn't quite sadness but isn't quite not. I sat down next to her and we talked about nothing for a minute. Her granddaughter, the vineyard, whether the chicken had been overcooked. Then I asked where Arthur was. She glanced to the bar. Around, she said. There was something in the way she said it. A practiced flatness, like a door that's been closed so many times the hinges don't squeak anymore. I didn't say what I had seen. Not yet. I just sat with her for a moment, and before I got up I said, "You look tired, June." She looked at me. Really looked. "I am," she said. "I've been tired for a while." I nodded and went to find my wife. We drove home mostly in silence. My wife fell asleep before we hit the highway. I drove and watched the road and didn't say anything. The radio played something soft that I didn't listen to. She went to bed when we got home. I sat in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the microwave said 12:47. I sat there until it said 2:15. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the shock was still doing its job. Maybe because 63 years of life teaches you that the worst moments don't come with a score. They're just quiet. They're just you in a kitchen at 2 in the morning while the microwave clock ticks over to 2116. The next morning I was up before my wife. I made coffee. I sat on the back deck, the one we built in 1998, and I watched the yard. We have a dogwood in the back corner that my daughter planted when she was 11 years old. It was doing what it does every September, losing its leaves in that slow, unhurried way. I watched it for a long time. When my wife came out with her coffee, I was cordial. I asked if she slept well. She said she had. We talked about whether we needed to call the gutters company before winter. It was the most ordinary conversation in the world, and I had it without falling apart, which surprised me. What I did not do was confront her, not that morning. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't denial. I had seen what I had seen, and I wasn't going to unsee it. But I had spent 31 years doing a job where you don't pull a permit until you've read the full set of drawings. You don't make a determination on incomplete information. You gather what you need, and then you act from a position of knowing rather than a position of feeling. That's what I did. I called June 3 days later. I told her I needed to talk to her. She said she knew. We met at a Panera in Fredericksburg, halfway between our houses. She was already there when I arrived, both hands around a coffee cup, and she looked like a woman who had been waiting for this conversation for longer than 3 days. She told me it had been going on for 14 months. 14 months. My daughter had visited twice in that time. I had turned 63. Arthur and I had gone fishing on the Rappahannock in April, and he had complained about his marriage, and I had listened and offered what I could, because that's what you do for a friend of 36 years. June said she had found out 4 months ago. A phone bill, a pattern of calls, a moment of clarity that she said felt like stepping on a nail in the dark. She had confronted Arthur. He had admitted it, minimized it, and then she said he had done something that I found harder to forgive than the affair itself. He had told her she was overreacting. She had been sitting with it alone for 4 months. I asked her what she wanted to do. She put her coffee cup down and straightened her back and said, "I want it to end on my terms." That's the thing about June. She was always the quietest person in any room, but quiet isn't the same as weak, and I should have known that, and I suspect Arthur had forgotten it entirely. We talked for 2 hours. We didn't make any dramatic plans. We didn't plot revenge in some movie poster sense. What we did was talk through the practical reality of 2 people in their 60s whose long marriages had just been broken by the same 2 people. We talked about attorneys. We talked about what we each owned and what we'd need. We talked about our kids and how to tell them. We talked about the house, the retirement accounts, the years. At the end, June said something I've thought about every day since. She said, The worst part isn't that they did it. The worst part is that they thought we wouldn't notice, or that if we did, we wouldn't do anything about it. I drove home and sat in my driveway for a few minutes before going inside. That weekend, my wife suggested we have dinner with Arthur and June. She said she'd been meaning to reach out to June, that they hadn't gotten together in a while. She said it casually, setting the table, not looking at me. I said that sounded fine. We went to their house the following Saturday, pot roast. Arthur made his usual jokes. My wife and June talked about a show they were both watching. I sat and ate and watched the four of us as if from a slight distance, the way you watch a building you know is going to have to come down. After dinner, Arthur and I sat on his porch with our drinks while the women cleaned up inside. He talked about the Commanders. He talked about his knee. He asked how my retirement was going, whether I was keeping busy. I said I was. He said he'd been thinking about fishing, that we hadn't gone since spring. I said we'd have to set something up. I looked at him across the porch, and I thought about 36 years, and I thought about the Rappahannock, and I thought about the corner behind the white lattice partition at the wedding, and I didn't say any of it. Not yet. There's a process to things. I believe in that. I learned it as an engineer, and I've tried to live by it. You don't pour the foundation until the forms are set. You don't set the forms until the ground is ready. The ground wasn't ready yet. I spent the next 3 weeks getting ready. I met with a divorce attorney in Richmond. A woman my daughter had found. She didn't know why I needed the name. I told her I was helping a neighbor. The attorney walked me through everything, and I mean everything. The house, the pension, the accounts, my wife's part-time income from her bookkeeping work. Virginia is an equitable distribution state, which doesn't mean 50-50. It means the court decides what's fair. I wanted to know what fair looked like before I opened my mouth. I wrote things down, dates, observations, the phone records I pulled from our shared plan. I'm not proud of going through the phone records, but I'm also not going to pretend I didn't do it. There were calls to Arthur's cell number going back 18 months, including 3 on the day of my daughter's birthday dinner, which we all ate together at an Olive Garden in Woodbridge, and which I had thought was a nice evening. June was doing her own version of the same thing, with her own attorney, in her own way. We tested each other occasionally, checking in. Not a lot of words, but enough. Once she sent me a message that said only, "Hang in there." I sent back, "You too." It was the most human I had felt in weeks. The morning I decided to say something. It was a Tuesday in October. No particular reason for Tuesday. My wife was making oatmeal. I was standing at the counter with my coffee. The kitchen was full of ordinary morning sounds. The spoon against the pot, the news on low from the other room, a truck going by outside. I said, "I know about you and Arthur." She stopped stirring. I said, "I know it's been going on for over a year. I have the phone records. I have the date it started or close to it. I have the night at the wedding in September, which is when I saw you." She put the spoon down very carefully on the rest beside the stove. She turned around. Her face had gone through several things in the space of about 4 seconds, and what it settled on was something I recognized. The calculation of a person deciding which version of this to try first. She said, "It's not what you think." I said, "I've thought about it for 6 weeks. I'm fairly certain it is." She said his name. She said it had just happened, that it didn't mean anything, that she didn't know how it had gotten so far. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I asked her one question. I said, "Did you ever think about telling me?" She didn't answer right away, and the pause was the answer, really. The pause was the whole story. She said she had been afraid. She said she hadn't wanted to hurt me. She said things had been different between us since I retired, that she'd felt lonely, that she hadn't handled it well. There were some true things in there, probably. Most justifications have a grain of truth in them. That's what makes them justifications instead of lies. I said I heard her. I said I needed her to understand that I wasn't angry in the way she might expect. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to break things. What I was going to do was be honest with her, the way she had not been honest with me. I told her I had spoken with an attorney. The color changed in her face. I told her I would be moving forward with a divorce. I told her I had already gone through the financials and I had a clear picture of where things stood. I told her she should get her own attorney. I said all of this quietly, standing in the kitchen where we had eaten probably 10,000 meals together, and when I finished there was just the sound of the news from the other room and the oatmeal going soft on the stove. She asked if there was any way to work through it. I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about it honestly because I'm not a person who makes decisions out of pride, and because 41 years deserves at least a real moment of consideration. I said, I don't think I could look at you and not see it, and I don't think that's fair to either of us. She nodded. She sat down at the kitchen table and she nodded, and for the first time since September she looked like a person who understood the weight of what she had done. That was the last real conversation we had in that house. June and I have talked several times since, about practical things mostly. Her divorce was finalized 2 months before mine. She sold the house and moved closer to her daughter in Maryland. Last I heard she was taking a ceramics class, which made me smile in a way I hadn't expected. My divorce took 8 months from filing to final. The house is mine. I bought out my wife's share with funds from my pension. My daughter flew in for the week it was finalized. My son called every other day during the process and didn't say much, just called, which is its own kind of love. Arthur and I have not spoken. I don't expect we will. 36 years is a long time to lose, and I won't say there aren't moments when I miss the fishing and the bad jokes and the easy friendship of someone who knew me when I was young. That loss is real. I'm not going to dress it up. But there's something that happened in those months between September and the end that I didn't expect. I remembered who I was before I'd let things get quiet. Not the anger. I mean something quieter than anger. A kind of clarity. The feeling of knowing what you will and won't accept, and being willing to act on it even when it costs you something. Even when it cost you 41 years of Sunday mornings and a deck you built together and the particular comfort of being known by someone for a very long time. I'm 63 years old. I eat oatmeal most mornings. I sit on the back deck and watch my daughter's dogwood. I have started going to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, which I never did before, and I have developed opinions about which vendor has the better tomatoes, which feels like exactly the kind of small, stubborn pleasure a man in my position is entitled to. I don't know what comes next. I don't have a plan for it the way I had a plan for the divorce. Some things you can't engineer. You just do the next right thing and trust that the ground will hold. The deck still holds. I was right about the deck screws. I keep coming back to the deck. Not the divorce, not the attorney's office, not the morning I said the words out loud in the kitchen. I keep coming back to the deck. The one my wife and I built in 1998, 3 weekends and 2 arguments about deck screws. I was right about the deck screws. I know that now because the deck is still standing, and I'm still standing on it, and she isn't here anymore. There's something about cause and effect that people misunderstand. They think it's dramatic. They think it announces itself, but most of the time it's quiet. It's a phone bill. It's a corner behind a white lattice partition. It's a pause where an answer should have been. The things we do, or don't do, or choose not to say, they don't disappear. They just wait. And eventually the weight of them becomes the shape of your life. Arthur made choices for 14 months. My wife made the same choices. And for 14 months, the life I thought I was living was something else entirely. That's not bitterness talking. That's just the arithmetic of it. Actions have weight. They accumulate, and at some point the structure either holds or it doesn't. What I learned, What I'm still learning, honestly, is that integrity isn't something you perform for other people. It's the thing that holds you together when no one is watching. Arthur and I fished the Rappahannock together. He sat across from me on that porch and talked about his knee and the Commanders and whether we'd go fishing again in the fall. And the whole time, the weight was already there. He just thought I couldn't see it. That's what a lack of character does to a person eventually. It makes them believe they're invisible. June understood something I had to learn, the slow way. She said they thought we wouldn't notice, or that if we did, we wouldn't do anything about it. And she was right. That's the assumption people make about those of us who are quiet. That quiet means passive. That patience means surrender. It doesn't. It means we're reading the full set of drawings before we act. I spent 6 weeks gathering myself before I said a word. Some people would call that weakness. I call it the difference between a reaction and a decision. Reactions come from pain. Decisions come from clarity. I wanted to act from clarity. I wanted to know exactly where I stood before I took a single step, because at 63 years old, I've earned the right to do things right. And June. I think about June sitting at that table near the windows, both hands around a wine glass, watching the dance floor with that practiced flatness. 4 months she carried it alone, 4 months of dinners and phone calls and pretending. The strength it takes is not a small thing. She didn't fall apart. She didn't make a scene. She got quiet in the way that matters. The way that means you're thinking, planning, deciding who you're going to be on the other side of it. I'm 63. I eat oatmeal most mornings. I go to the farmer's market on Saturdays, and I have opinions about tomatoes. My daughter's dogwood is losing its leaves again, right on schedule the way it always does. The deck holds. It was always going to hold. I used the right screws.